From Cape Coral to California, people across the country are reporting mysterious lights in the night sky. All right, take a look. Some people say they look like fireballs. A Cape Coral family saw our newscast at noon about these lights in California on New Year's Eve and almost jumped off their couch. They say they saw the exact same thing at their house last night. NBC2's Alex DeArmas picks up our story.
It was a normal Sunday night for this Cape Coral family. Until, in the night sky,
big red-orange light. Right behind that was another one. And then right behind that was another one.
Roxanne Hoffman says she saw something similar to this. This is video from California on New Year's Eve.
Like a reddish-orange, almost like a fireball, but you just didn't see any flames.
She says the lights came from the north. Neither she nor her mother-in-law heard a thing.
Just like they're following each other, just like it would be two people following each other, right? And it was weird.
They say the lights then got behind a large cloud and disappeared.
It was weird. It was really, really weird.
NBC2 discovered the National UFO Reporting Center took 200 calls in 2 days, all reporting orange, reddish lights in the sky.
Clearly, the reports that have come in here during the last 40 hours have virtually nothing to do with fireworks.
The director of the center, Peter Davenport, says in the past 19 months, he's gotten over 5,000 similar calls.
And they seem to defy any similarity to terrestrial aircraft. We just don't know what they are.
Davenport says a small percentage of these cases can be Chinese lanterns or hot air balloons. But he isn't convinced they all are.
At least we feel we're not seeing things, you know, and it's been seen somewhere else.
While the mystery still remains, Hoffman says she's keeping an eye out.
Is it a lantern, just a flashing light, or is that something else? Did some people right here in Central Oregon and all across the Northwest really ring in New Year with a UFO?
It would stop and hover and be all shimmery like a forest fire color.
Something they'd never seen before.
That's really weird.
Yeah, because you can see all different kinds of lights on it.
This is video Pam Stewart of Bend shot outside her home on New Year's Eve. She describes a floating, flashing light she saw off in the distance. A flying object she says couldn't be a lantern.
And it was moving horizontal and then just off.
Hundreds of miles away in California, others say they also saw something odd in the night sky.
Almost in a diamond or triangle shape. It was weird.
This big illuminated form.
And whatever it was moved up and to the left. It hovered there for probably about 60 seconds.
And back here in Oregon, Eric Whitford took this photo from his Medford home and shared it with us on Facebook. No, this is not fireworks, he writes. This object came in from the left of us and then just stopped. Another appeared and both disappeared. This was really amazing to watch. Could it be a UFO, a drone, a trick of the light? Even aerial experts say that's up in the air.
Is just, well, I'm sure you know. I mean, it's fascinating, if nothing else, just because it's like you immerse yourself inside a science fiction novel while it's being written, almost. There's all these ideas and theories, and I'm not saying I know which ones are true and which ones aren't, but there's certainly a lot of them. And Skull and Bones is one of them.
Yeah, I read the book on Skull and Bones. And after I read it, I happened to be in Connecticut, so I went down to the Yale University and I visited. They call it the Tomb, the building, and
okay,
yeah, it's a really nice little area of the campus. It's near they have a bookstore and coffee shops and some shops and stuff not far away, and it's kind of old, like brick buildings, and it's pretty neat. And then the tomb, of course, you can't see in any of the windows. They're all like blocked, kind of the way it's built. So it's extremely secretive. And then in the book, they were saying how like every year they choose like a certain amount of people that they will allow to become Skull and Bone members. And I think it's
Yeah.
like 4 or something like that each year. And it's like the
Right.
whole school has like a ceremony and like a celebration, just for for the new members that are going to be chosen. It's like a huge thing, and everybody wants to be a member. It's extremely popular at the school. So despite all the controversial stuff we hear, as far as the Yale students and at the Yale school, Skull and Bones is the thing.
That makes sense. Well, I think if they're probably I don't know a lot about it, but it's an Ivy League school that has a lot of wealthy, connected families that send their kids there. And if nothing else, there's probably powerful business and political connections that are made through something like that are useful, I would think, lifelong. And, it's a kind of a elite group of people that I think swear kind of an allegiance to each other and to support each other. And that's not without value. Just I think anyone that had a group like that, it could be valuable for them, even if it wasn't Skull and Bones in Yale. If you had a neighborhood group of people that swore a lifelong allegiance to you, and years later you could turn to them and say, "Hey, I need some help with this," and they were able to actually help you, and that would be a big deal. And if there's more to it than that, I don't know, but it's interesting.
They said when Kerry was running against, I think it was, we're going kind of back a ways, but I think it was Kerry that ran against Bush the second time he ran. And they said, they were saying, no matter what, it'll be Skull and Bones as the next president, because both Kerry and Bush were in Skull and Bones, both went to Yale.
We're in Skull and Bones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bush Jr., that is. Actually, I think Bush Sr. Went to Yale as well. I'm not sure if he was in Skull and Bones. He probably was.
Probably was, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I never put a whole lot of stock into that stuff, but over the years I've changed. I guess that's part of my story that I'll get to. But when you start to look into this thing, and when you've had an experience of it yourself, it does kind of change you and how you look at the world potentially. And I'm sorry. Well, no, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I will say one thing though. I personally feel that it's a myth that you have to be like a 33rd degree Mason. This is what a lot of people are saying. You have to be a 33rd degree Mason to be in Skull and Bones. And first of all, nobody becomes a 33rd degree Mason. It goes up to 32, and very rare. It's a very special honor for a person to be granted the 33rd degree. And then, so the idea that you have to be a 33rd to be in Skull and Bones when there's just a bunch of college kids is kind of almost nonsense. And then on top of that, I don't even think that it's necessarily a requirement that you're even a Mason to be in Skull and Bones. So while there's certain things that are similar, a lot of myths related to Skull and Bones. In fact, they have I do believe they have a certain amount of female members that take part in the ceremonies, although I forget. It's been a while since I read the book.
Yeah, you know more about it than I do. I've always kind of, and I could be wrong, but the popular things are like the Masons this and Skull and Bones that, and I've always sort of, and I still, I entertain ideas like that, and I'll listen to someone, but I've always kind of assumed they're just sort of, that those really are just conspiracy theories, and that when there's any kind of a secret group or any kind of a secret anywhere, people seem to like to create interesting explanations of what lies behind the closed doors. And it doesn't mean that there's something otherworldly or that there's a diabolical world control plot. And I guess I've come to consider the possibility of things like that, partially just from my own observations of the world. I think that you actually could run the world with a fairly small group of people, and if you had control of those people, you literally could do just about anything. But I don't know that that would be something like Skull and Bones versus even potentially something that involves aliens. Because with an alien, you could control the ruling 300 elite, let's say, of the world without anyone knowing it, including them, without leaving any evidence for the FBI or CIA to find, without any secret emails. You could do it all with technology that to you would be as commonplace as what you and I are doing right now with Discord, but to a human, it would be magic and unthinkable. And so I think that's more likely to be what's going on in the world, is that there is an alien presence here and that it runs the world to some extent. And anyway, I can get into that at some point, but I don't necessarily think that humans are in control. Although the decisions that are made would have a human face on them. And, you know, maybe if you're taking let's say it's the top 300 chief executive officers of the largest multinational investment corporations in the world, which by their nature, they control 90% of the world's money, let's say. And through that, they essentially could decide a lot of things that actually impact the course of the future. And I think those people may very well go into meetings and they think that they're making decisions out of free will, but in fact they're not. And that's where you get into ideas about sort of alien implants or alien psychic manipulation, or the ability to kind of influence what people actually do remotely without the person knowing it. And maybe even involving the aliens knowing the future and knowing what decisions, kind of the cascade of effects that will happen after that and into Earth's future. Like if the CEO does this one deal and how that ripples out into the future and affects multiple different nations and multiple different conflicts maybe, and maybe leads to certain wars and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And to the alien, that's part of a more complex, maybe multiple dimensional agenda that they have. And I think you can get into a lot of hypothetical reasons why they might want to do that. Some of them are very egocentric and human, kind of that, they love us, or they're angels, or they're holy, and other ones are, more negative tone, like they want to keep us suffering because they feed off fear. And then another one that I'm more recently interested in is the idea that essentially this is a soul seeding program, and that and I jumped right into something I didn't think I'd even get into, which this isn't my experience, but the idea there is that, let's say, a third of the human population contain alien souls, actual alien souls, that the consciousness there is alien, but that consciousness doesn't necessarily know it's alien because it's been sent here with its memory erased to experience mortality and to experience this mortal experience that happens here on Earth.
Yeah, I didn't know if you were done talking. Maybe your device did go to sleep.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I was just saying that thing about the alien soul. So that's one sort of idea about what's going on with aliens and humans, and it's a story sort of the entire human race and the universe. And I didn't even cover nearly all of it, but one of many. And other ones are things like the Illuminati, and the idea there can vary, I think, a little bit, but it's essentially that there's a group of elite people that influence or run the world. And that was something that I too was never interested in for most of my life, and always kind of thought was just I don't know, I didn't really pay attention to it. It was just sort of a silly thing you'd see on TV sometimes. And it was only after I saw a UFO and started really listening to ideas and sort of thinking about the world differently, and kind of looking at history and how it's sort of more or less always been the same. And you know, how people have never really managed to get along and never really had a period of time where there's peace and never really allowed for wealth to be shared. Like it's almost like the same asshole's been alive the entire time. You know, and that dude sits on a throne and he's just a dickhead and he doesn't want to share wealth with people and doesn't allow the human race to really evolve to the
Yeah,
potential that it.
let me interrupt you real quick.
Yeah,
What do you think of us using? Because I've been recording this so far. What do you think of us using that as a preface? And we'll
sure.
what we'll do is we'll just continue into the interview. And would there be any way you could give like a brief bio, even if you don't share your real name?
Yeah, I wrote it down. Yeah, sure. So I had kind of an order to go in and I totally just went out of it, but I'd be happy to.
Yeah, let's do that
Um,
now. I'll keep it recording. And if there's anything
okay.
that you decide you don't want me to include, just let me know. And
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't have any top secret information, but I'm going to stay a little anonymous at this point. I think that's a smart thing to do for various reasons. My name's Doug, and I'm 51 years old. I'm originally from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and that's where I grew up. It's where I went to college. I have a doctorate degree from the University of Michigan in the field of medicine. I'm going to stay a little vague, but that's that's some of the information. I currently live in the Denver area in Colorado, and what else? I work here and live here. I've been here for about 10 years. And I was also, I guess, another potentially relevant thing. I was raised in an atheist family, very science oriented, always kind of grew up looking at the world through the eyes of science in a sense, meaning that God isn't true. There aren't really ghosts. That things are more explainable through, Einstein's equations and chemistry and physics and force equals mass times acceleration and stuff like that. And so that type of upbringing, in a sense, maybe it kind of isolates you from some of these ideas because they're just things that you're not really exposed to. I even religion, in a sense, is sort of a similar idea, I feel, to aliens, because it's accepting the idea that there's something that's sort of not human, that's in a different place, and that it comes here periodically and has some type of interaction with human beings. And that's not how I grew up. I didn't really believe that that's how the world works. In fact, I think the first time that I sort of had I don't know, maybe a deviation from that was actually after taking a bunch of the pre-med type science classes, and you've already had a year of chemistry, a year of physics, a year of organic chemistry, and you've kind of learned how molecules have three-dimensional shapes and different charges and how they fit together and how that is all used in a cell to have various functions, and how individual cells in your body have their own membrane and their own organs inside the cell and receptors. And it's actually pretty fascinating stuff, especially when you understand it at the level of organic chemistry. And my reaction, are you there still?
Yeah.
I don't know where I stopped talking on your end.
I had it all in my mind, and then I was looking and considering like why it cut out, and I got sidetracked.
Okay, no problem.
But you were
Well, anyway,
talking about the medical stuff and your medical experience and some of the scientific stuff related to that.
okay. Yeah, well, essentially what I was saying is that through some of my science education, I started to question the idea of natural selection or the idea that life just evolved out of water and lightning and amino acids, and I started to consider that it kind of looks to me like something intelligent actually made this, that we are in fact a machine. And of intelligent design, and that I remember kind of having that epiphany, and I was just throwing that in there in my bio. So essentially, I'm mostly scientifically educated and have for most of my life looked at the world through the eyes, I guess, of maybe more mainstream news type of mindset of that, everything's explainable and everything pretty much fits within the textbooks, and that ideas that are outside of that are conspiracy theories and are silly, and that's what crazy people think. And of course, ancient slaves built the pyramids, and of course, people just evolved from amino acids in water, and there wasn't ideas that aliens made us or God made us are silly. I mean, that's how, although I guess the God part isn't really a part of the mainstream, because a lot of people believe in the God part, which I find kind of ironic that they then have a hard time with UFOs. But anyway, I'm rambling. So that's my bio. And do you want me to go on to some of the experiences that I've had, which is really just two, but.
Yeah, we can do that. I just wanted to ask you real quick about your logo there. Is that Baphomet, the god?
Oh yeah, it is. But that, to be honest with you, well, it is, and that's an interesting story. That's a game account, on Discord. So this I all made up years ago, and it has nothing to do with really any kind of religious orientation or message. But Baphomet, the god, is the person on the picture, and there are stories about I guess a person called Enki, which is supposed to be an alien that potentially made humans and is a geneticist, but and other people would say that has a satanic type of feel. But the story of Enlil and Enki is that the person that made us became known as Satan, not because he was, but because the other alien didn't want people to listen to him and said my brother's bad, and that basically through the years and through human translations it became something that it wasn't. But I'm not saying that story is true, but that is an interesting one. I think the picture of Baphomet includes like the medical symbol on his belt, and so there's a whole another story there that most people I think have not heard.
Now, are you aware of Lucifer and Satan as being two completely different beings? Or are you of the common opinion that they're the same being?
I haven't heard that, and I guess, to be honest, I haven't looked that much into that, the idea of Lucifer and Satan and God. I'm not saying that there isn't a possibility there's something to that. That's just not something that I have that much knowledge about.
How about the possibility of the common idea of God being sort of a misunderstanding of what's thought of as the higher self, that we have a higher self and a lower self, and most people are strongly held back and connected to their lower self, and it's through connecting to the higher self that people are able, for example, to see into the spiritual world and stuff like that. Have you ever considered things along those lines?
I have, and I think that there's a lot of different ways that those issues are perceived. Like there's a lot of, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. There's a lot of slightly different storylines that are along the same sort of general topic, I think, of what you just said. So one example would be there's a kind of a following out there of something called the Law of One, which I think the idea is that everything comes from one energy. And actually, the story I was telling you about soul seeding, really the ultimate, the start of that story from the person that I've been hearing it from, is that there is one consciousness, one source energy, and that everything is literally a part of it, and that it's almost like it has multiple personalities, and so it's experienced us all as different independent people, but the idea would be that in fact we're not, and that we're all connected to that source energy, and that everything we see in this physical world is a part of that source energy. It's sort of along the lines of Einstein's law that energy is never created or destroyed, and only changes forms, and that everything in the universe is a part of that same energy. and that is what is called God. And that's what's meant by going to heaven, is returning to that source energy. And that you, along those lines, you are an immortal soul, whether you're an alien or a human or a, whatever it is, and that you do continue on, but that within that there's sort of these, I guess, different separations of source energy that experience themselves as independent beings, and that includes aliens and humans and even the universe as a whole. So it's an interesting idea, and that sounds similar to what you were saying to me. The exact thing you were referring to, I don't know that I've heard of, but I've found that a lot of these ideas have a lot in common, and that includes religion. And with religion, I think, in a sense, you could say that they're talking about source energy. They're just assigning these different explanations to things in a way, and that even within spirituality and the UFO topic in general, I've found that from my point of view, it seems like that's what's going on, is that everyone's kind of talking about similar things, but they've been told slightly different stories about it, and then they're given different rules. So for instance, in religion, if you saw a UFO, I think you would tend to say that's an angel or a demon, and then you would turn to the Bible to give you all the answers about how the universe works and what that might have been, and you sort of wouldn't be allowed to stray outside of that too much. And I've even talked with people that have PhDs and master's degrees in theology, and they've been willing to share some of their way of looking at it. And they would say things to me like, well, when you have an experience in life that you just can't explain, and when you have the sense that there's something there that's intelligent that is interacting with you somehow, or that something can't have been a coincidence, that's God, and that the way you get to know God that you just experienced is to turn to the Bible and read it. And that's fine, but that's not the way that I deal with it, because when I have an experience like that, I don't assume that that's God. I just assume that it's a strange experience, and then I turn to multiple places to kind of get ideas of what that may or may not be. And it could be that it is what the Bible says, and that is all true. And it also could be that that's all misunderstandings or misrepresentations of something else. But when the way I look at it is, when you become too entrained in one ideology like that, it sort of has the effect of blinding you from. Are you still there, by the way?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Okay. I don't know if it shut off again, but I think it kind of has the effect of blinding you to other ideas, and in the search for truth, sort of understanding that we don't really know. At least I don't know. I mean, I haven't had the experience myself of God gliding down from the sky and putting his hands on my head and somehow impregnating me with understanding of everything that's happened. And I absolutely know that that's real. And given the fact that I haven't had an experience like that, I'm sort of left listening to stories of different people. And some of them maybe are more reputable, influential people, but that doesn't mean their story's true. And so I keep looking for answers, and I guess I approach it from the point of view, if I haven't seen it with my own eyes, then there's a certain amount of doubt that I have that it's right. And to be honest with you, that even happened when I actually saw a UFO. That one of the experiences, I don't know if you've had a sighting yourself or anything like that, but one of the first things, over the first day or so, that I encountered was self-doubt, was doubting myself, and kind of like, did that really happen? Or was I hallucinating? Did I make that up? And I had somebody with me that also saw it, so I think that kind of helped keep me from really going too far into that. But my point really is I kind of question everything, and I assume that I don't know the answers, and that if I'm talking to a human being, that they don't know them either. And I'm interested in hearing their ideas, but I don't take anything as scripture, and it's possible that that'll change, and it's possible that I'm failing some tests by doing that, and that means I'm going to go to hell. But I don't feel that way, and so anyway, that's how I kind of approach those things.
Well, a lot of people are searching for the truth, and the truth is we live in an extremely materialistic world and society. And a lot of these things, humanity has a whole nother aspect of themselves that, because of the materialism, is being suppressed and overlooked, and that's the spiritual nature of man. And a lot of these things that we're talking about here today are of a spiritual nature, and they can only be understood from a spiritual perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest with you, I've spent years now listening to this, or the ideas on these topics, and researching them, if you will. I mean, I'm not getting a PhD in ufology, but on my own, I'm searching for answers, and so I could sit here and literally talk for days on end, and it's probably better to sort of package things a little differently. But along the lines of what you were saying, it made me think of a more recent direction that I had from the person I'm talking to, which was along the lines of there actually being technologies developed through the intelligence communities for mind control. And one of the implications, and one of the things I watched a number of videos from, let's see, where is it here? Trying to find, I probably just left. I think it's Peter Duncan, but he's a MIT trained, I think he's a physicist. He specializes in artificial intelligence and has studied under Noam Chomsky in linguistics, I think designing AI to recognize different languages, essentially. And he, for a lot of his career, apparently has worked for the CIA and NSA. And he now kind of gives, or at least he did, I don't know as of late exactly how recently it goes on, but he's had some lectures where he's kind of talking about some of the technologies that are actually being developed theoretically by just human beings. And one of the things that came across from listening to him is that he doesn't think there's a soul, and he doesn't believe in those kinds of things because he's a purely scientific mind, a very brilliant one. And there's a certain danger in that potentially, because if there is a soul, and if he's developing technology that applies to people's brains, he's potentially doing things to that soul without realizing it. And that follows the idea that the cabal, whatever that is in the process of enslaving humanity without realizing it, and that they are the evil force on Earth that is being countered by an alien force. Now, whether or not they have aliens on their side too, and so it gets into this complicated thing, but it has the air of there's a battle coming, and that there is a light versus darkness, and that there is a human component to it, although those humans are made up of alien souls and human souls, and that there's also an actual alien component to it, that there actually are aliens that, if nothing else, interact with these different sides subconsciously and through dream manipulation and psychic manipulation, but perhaps even in physical form interact with certain elite people. Let's say there's a group in the CIA that actually talks to an alien, and maybe the alien tells them that it's Christ, and and they totally believe it, and all of a sudden they start doing all the things the alien tells them they should do. But of course the alien might be lying, it might be Satan. So you get into all this crazy kind of stuff where it's not clear what's really going on, but I start to look at the world through the eyes of someone that's starting to believe some of these ideas, and that there is some kind of an alien involvement with different groups on Earth, and that those different groups might think they're good or bad, but in fact that doesn't mean they necessarily are when looked at from a truly neutral point of view, because they may not understand what they're doing, especially if they're doing things that involve mind control, if you will, or one of the ideas is that there's nanotechnology that's being developed to attach to the neurons in your brain, and that might be an alien technology that's very useful. It could be that aliens, let's say, fly their spaceships just by thought, because they've essentially merged their biology with technology, and literally down to the neuronal level, and that when they think, their neurons are talking to some type of nano chip that not only can send messages to them, but it can send messages the other way and send it out to some type of technology. And that might be a great advancement for humanity, but it's all being created by people who don't believe in the soul. And if they look at the brain as being purely mechanical, purely physical, that when you die, you're gone, there's nothing more to it, that everything you experience and all the emotions that you have are just, just explained by physics and science, and that there's really nothing more to it than that. That these ideas of spirituality are sort of what the less intelligent people like to think to make themselves feel better, and that has a certain danger to it, because if there is a soul, then they in fact may be doing things that are incredibly detrimental, not only to your life here, but to your immortal soul, and cutting you off from being able to return to that source energy, which would be the same thing as cutting you off from going to heaven. But of course, the story gets more complicated than that, because it starts off with the idea that the aliens are already doing that to humanity, essentially, and causing human souls to recycle over and over again into another body with their memory erased, and reincarnation type of thing. And that the downside of that really is that that you lose all your connections with the people you've loved and known. That erasure of your memory is permanent, and that you forget your past lives, that you kind of have lost all your history, and that you're never really allowed to go back to source energy or heaven and to decide if you want to come back again and where you want to go. And the story is that that's all being done to provide these alien souls with a mortal experience. Now, I'm not saying that story is true. It's one of many, and a lot of them have similarities, but they then change different aspects of that. Like, I've heard different variations that say that all the people here are alien souls, and some of them maybe say that none of them are, and then you can get into ideas that are sort of similar but have a more negative. And I'm not an expert on all of these by any means, but there are ideas of things like archons, which are sort of these alienish type dark entities that feed off human suffering and pain and stress, and I guess that would imply that the whole point of Earth is to sort of keep everybody suffering all the time, kind of a low grade suffering where you're worrying about your bills and worrying about your relationship and worrying about the virus, and then eventually you die, and that there's something actually feeding off of all of that.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
That's I think, those are ideas I have to admit, come up with on my own before I heard them packaged in some of the ways that they have been. Because if you look at how the planets run, it does, like you said, it's materialistic. It has a lot of components that seem to be intended to keep you from to really being secure and happy, and to sort of maintain a structure where there's a very few people that are wealthy and powerful and kind of immune from a lot of the everyday life things that most people experience. And then there are these massive amounts of it's actually pretty shocking when you hear the statistics of how many people live in poverty on a global scale, because it's virtually the entire human population. And so you can ask yourself from that point of view, well, why is that? And how did this happen like this? And why hasn't that changed? And why don't we help each other? And why don't we maintain the population, not through depopulation, but just through policies and education? Why don't we maintain it at a level where where everybody can have what they need, and there's essentially no one that goes about. I mean, why can't you have a world where everyone just has a job and they do it more or less, and through that system, if you need groceries, you get them, and if you need a house, there's one there for you. And why does it always have to be this this sense of, well, if you don't pay your house bill, they're going to come kick you out, and they will, and they'll literally throw you out of your house onto the street where you might die. And the system will kind of be sitting there saying, yeah, that's how it works, buddy. You better work harder. And now you get a job that pays less, so you're going to have to work even more. So it does have this feel of like a ratcheting system
like
that
a slave
doesn't allow.
system.
Yeah, you're right. Like
Modern
a slave
day
system.
slavery.
Yes, financial slavery.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We're at about the 45-minute mark here. What do you say we pause the interview? We'll take like a 5 or 10-minute break, and then if it's okay with you, we can resume.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Okay, welcome back. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So, on January 3rd, 2014, in Colorado, you had an experience, and I didn't want us to go too much further without getting into that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, that I did, and maybe I'll just real quickly. So I would say that in terms of actually seeing something UFO like with my own eyes, I've technically had 2 experiences, although then you're referring to my second one, which was fairly recently. But real quickly, the first time that I actually potentially saw something was as a small child, and I have one of those memories that you have from when you're really young. That was an innocent memory. It was a memory of looking out my bedroom window and at night and seeing a helicopter with lights on the ends of the rotors, just kind of sitting up there in the sky a little ways above the trees. And that was just a memory I had, and for some reason it was a strong memory. I mean, it was something I was aware of, and it was only as I got older, I think around 7th or 8th grade, that for some reason I realized that helicopters never have lights on the ends of the rotors, and therefore that wasn't what I saw, and that was the first time that I have a recollection of seeing something, although admittedly that's a very distant, faint childhood memory. And then the thing that you're referring to, that happened on January 3rd, 2014, and I live outside of the Denver area in Colorado, and it was about I'm also an amateur photographer, and that day there had been really interesting clouds. There was like a big front that had come across the mountains, moving from west to east, and the skies here are you oftentimes get really just amazing clouds, and you can just see a long ways here. For some reason, it's different in the East Coast. I think there's more trees around, and so there's this huge long band of clouds that had really detailed structure in them, and I had been taking photos of that, and I was upstairs developing those on Photoshop, and I walked down, and I was walking by my living room window, and this was 9:30 at night in January, so it was dark out, and our living room window at that time did have a view of the mountains. It looked to the west, and something caught my eye, and I looked out, and what I 100% thought I saw was a plane. I was assuming it was a jet plane on fire. I saw flames coming out of a jet engine. Now, that being said, it's not like I have experience seeing a jet on fire, but that's what I perceived it as. And it looked like it was flying more or less like a medium altitude for a jet, and that it was coming in my direction, kind of straight at me, and I saw these flickering orange flames, and I remember my heart kind of sinking. It was, it happened really quickly, but it was sort of this realization of, oh my God, that plane's gonna crash. Like, it's just a matter of time, and I'm gonna be watching it falling out of the sky. And you don't have a lot of time to really process that, but I remember that being my reaction. And I guess at some point I walked onto the back deck of the house, which wasn't far from the window that I was looking out. And I don't remember a lot, I guess, in between that impression and when I started seeing it better and realizing that that's not what it was. But what became clear to me was that what I thought at first were flames coming out of the back of a jet were in fact, and I don't know what to call them because I don't know what it was, but it was, if you use the analogy of flames, the flames were coming out in every direction. And it did have a flickering or almost plasma-like quality like that. It was coming out in all directions. It was more or less a round shape, and it was flying directly at me. I mean, it was up like an airplane. It wasn't at my altitude, but it was coming like literally right above me. And as it got closer, and there were two others that came later, but this first one, I remember kind of having for some reason, it reminded me of a jellyfish in the sense that I used to go to the East Coast as a kid and summer vacations, and some of the jellyfish there would wash up, and you could kind of look through the jellyfish. They were sort of clear, and you could sort of see little organs or something inside of them, but you couldn't really clearly see them. And I had it made me think of that for some reason, because I could kind of see structure inside of it, but you really couldn't see structure inside of it. It's hard to explain. And it also did seem like it sort of jumped periodically instead of it being completely a smooth linear flight like a plane. And it could be that that was just not what it did, and I just perceived it that way. But I did have that recollection. But there wasn't it didn't accelerate rapidly. It didn't do any extreme maneuvering, and it went over me. And this again is in the Denver area, and anyone that's been out here, I mean, these are big skies. You can see a long ways. And
oh yeah, I've been out there.
Have you? Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that when I was out there, the California fires, the smoke was all the way up there in the mountains. I'm like, why? How come I can't see the mountains? Everybody always talks about the mountains. And the locals, right. Yeah, the locals told me, well, that's all the smoke from California. I was shocked that the smoke would go that far and obstruct that much.
Yeah, you're right. There's been times with the fires in the West that it really is smoky here. But one of the things I noticed was that usually, there's a lot of air traffic around there generally from the airport, the Denver International Airport. And I did notice it looked like I didn't see any planes in the sky. And it flew right over me, and I was kind of in a bowl. There was like sort of hills surrounding where I lived, not just small ones. And with a jet, when it flies over you, eventually you hear something. And it flew over me and just kept going east, and it was dead silent. There was no sound at all. And that was one of the things that struck me. And I walked inside, and my wife was on the couch, and I was kind of, going into this rant of like, holy shit, that was a UFO. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but but like, that was, I'll try not to. That was a UFO, holy cow. And
it's okay. We'll be like Joe Rogan's show, an occasional swear won't hurt.
Okay. But I, sort of having this emotional reaction of, oh my God, what, and it was very emotional. I'm not really relaying it very well. And so I was roughly in there for 10 minutes saying whatever it was I was saying, which I was probably kind of just excited. And she said, there's another one. And it was actually two more. One was further north. It was almost like they were in formation. And the other one was, again, very much like the first one, coming right at us, and from the mountains, from the west, flying more or less due east. And we both walked out that time. And that's when I ran back in the kitchen, which was right off the deck. And that happens to be where I set my keys and my phone. And so I grabbed my cell phone and I took the two photographs that I sent you. And the ones I sent you are cropped because the photo itself was very zoomed out. You could barely see it almost. It's hard to take it's hard to take a photograph straight up at night when you actually try to do it, and it didn't really capture it real well. But I do have those two photographs, and her reaction was kind of like, I remember her grabbing my arm and kind of being like, "Oh my God, what's happening?" And sort of having the feeling of like, what the hell's going on? And are there, like, should we be out here? Is that thing gonna like see us and come down? It was,
Yeah,
you know,
sounds like
maybe
it
a,
must have been scary. Like I would have probably maybe thought I was under attack by the way you describe it almost.
yeah, well, I don't know that I thought I was under attack, but I definitely thought that maybe I could be, or like maybe 1,000 more of them were gonna come. You know, we didn't know what was happening. It did definitely have the feeling of I was seeing something that wasn't human and was intelligently controlled. Now, that's a jump of logic. I'm not saying that that's the only explanation, but that at the time was the feeling that I had, and so it went over like the other one, totally quiet. We both saw it. And she was a little bit scared, and I was kind of, yeah, what the, and we didn't know what was going to come back. So I think the rest of the night we kind of sat there glued to the window, and every plane that went by we thought was a UFO until it got close enough that you could tell that it was just a plane. But because the landing lights on planes oftentimes sort of do look like the way this looked from a distance. They can sort of look like an orange ball of light that's shimmering and glowing, but this was up close, and it was, I don't know what it was coming off of it, but it was like a ball of plasma, or there was stuff radiating off of it, and there really aren't words that I'm aware of to describe it because I'm not aware of what it was, and that was my experience the second time, and I went in, and that's where it was kind of an emotional experience. I remember we both said to each other, if this isn't on the, because we're fairly near NORAD, we're near Colorado Springs, relatively speaking. And we both said to each other, and this again may be a flawed logic, but it was that if this isn't on the news tonight, then we know they actually do cover things up. That, that the government actually does lie. And we had never really thought this way before, but that event, all of a sudden it's like, well, this ought to be, it flew right over Interstate 25, and it was plain as day. And, and I would imagine that the U.S. military had the technology to be aware of this thing. And that was my reaction. I'm not saying this is a perfect reaction, but that's how I thought. And it wasn't on the news. As a matter of fact, I've never met anyone here in Colorado who saw that. I've never seen any reports of it. I sent you the 3 videos that are from California, Oregon, and Florida that were posted within a day, or relatively close to that, and it appears they're of the same thing. Those videos have people's video clips of orange balls of light, and so it looks like what I saw was flying all over the country over a couple day period of time.
Interesting. There was public reports of ball lightning just around that time. Have you compared? I haven't really looked at ball lightning. Have you compared what you saw in your photos to and considered that?
Well, yeah, I think I did loosely, although ball lightning itself is not fully. I don't know that that's fully agreed upon in terms of science. That it's a hard thing to find a picture of, and it didn't seem like it fit that. And again, it looks like the same things in these videos, and the way it just flew over us with airplane speed. I mean, it was a perfectly clear sky. I don't know. I mean, I guess that's a possibility, but.
So the speed, was that similar to an airplane, and then they didn't stop and hover at all, though they just kept moving?
Yeah, when I saw them, they flew very much like an airplane. They kept moving. There was nothing outside of the appearance and the lack of sound that was like a typical UFO. It didn't like disappear into space in a split second. And although I guess maybe one of them did kind of accelerate leaving. I don't know. That's a vague memory, and I'd have to ask my wife what her recollection was. But it wasn't anything like that. That seemed to be the videos from the other states. People were saying that they had done hovering in place, and and they were describing like 11 or 12 of them and creating a triangle formation. And the more I've looked, it looks like similar things have been all over the world. Now, it could be that it's ball lightning, but from what I've seen of ball lightning is sort of an enigma in and of itself, and it's not clear what ball lightning is or isn't, and you'll kind of get different answers about that. So, I guess that's a possibility.
I did get the photos you took, and the audience will see those on the screen. Have you shared these photos with anyone else online or anywhere else?
Yeah, and you're welcome to do with them as you please. But I did, and that was part of, so pretty quickly after seeing that, I actually went on, the way that I am, I'm just like right away, like, all right, what the hell was that? And I'm digging into the internet, which is really the only place you have to turn. It never would have occurred to me to call a news station or the police or the military. I would just assume that either they don't know or they're not going to tell me. And so why bother? So I went right onto the internet and I found the UFO site called MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, which is a worldwide reporting site. And
Oh, yeah.
I did post the photo and the story, and I actually had one of them. They were pretty professional.
Now, are you aware, just real quickly, that the president of that is like the nephew or son or something like that of Alan Hynek?
No, I didn't know that. I don't even know who Alec Hynek is.
He was the scientist that was involved in Project Blue Book in history.
Oh, interesting. No, I didn't really know anything about MUFON. It was just a place to kind of say, hey, I saw something, and if nothing else, emotionally, that made me feel better. And I was impressed because right away, although some of the responses that people typed were like, oh, I saw a skyscraper on fire fly over me. You get these silly responses. But then one of the researchers actually responded and eventually ended up calling me and doing a phone interview. And that was interesting in and of itself because he kind of had I had the impression it was a boilerplate interview. He said, did you have missing time? Did you pass out? It was various questions like that. And that really wasn't a component of my experience. I just described what it was. And
He was trying to see if you got abducted.
it seemed that way. Yeah. He had sort of a routine list of questions he went through. And then what he said to me, which actually was another kind of shocking thing. He said, well, he goes, he said, I'm a retired airline military pilot, and I can tell you absolutely 100% sure aliens are coming to Earth. There are multiple different species, but what you saw was anti-gravity propulsion, and it was coming out of the new Area 51, which is located underground on the western edge of Colorado, eastern edge of Utah.
Oh, yeah.
Just like bam, that was his answer. And I'm like, what? And and over time that almost bothered me more than the idea that I saw an alien, because then that starts to lead into, well, okay, so I'm watching NASA launch rockets, but we've got anti-gravity propulsion. And this wasn't that far away from the election, so it sort of started a split in my mind of seeing the televised world versus what maybe is the secret world. And I remember thinking that at the time it was Clinton versus Trump, and I remember thinking that this is like everybody focusing on the rabbit and the squirrel in the corner of the room, and they're not seeing the tiger behind them in the shadows. And
Yeah.
like that this isn't really what's going on. And it has that quality to it of kind of changing how you perceive the power structures, how you perceive motivation. So that's what the MUFON person told me, and then I started telling people that I was around about it. In fact, I remember having a pretty strong, like, immediate thought of wanting to like grab people by their shirt collar and be like, shake them, saying like, you don't understand, like, listen to me. It's like there's really something out there that we don't understand. And again, that might be a little bit of a jump because I don't know what it was.
Well,
And
you know what the flat earthers say? One of the things that they use is, which of course I don't believe in a flat earth. It's kind of nonsense, and there's a lot of evidence to disprove it. But one of the things that the flat earthers talk about is that all the pictures were being shown and stuff aren't authentic, like the ones that are coming from NASA and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And so what it is, though, that they're hiding isn't the shape of the Earth. It's all the ships around the Earth. And that's why we're not getting authentic pictures, or a lot of the pictures are being tampered with and altered just to hide the ships.
Interesting. Yeah, so this was sort of my plunge into the UFO world, and that's certainly a colorful world, and I've encountered like the idea you're expressing. I mean, there is a lot of stuff out there. My impression, and I had time to kind of process this, and I'm the type of person who, like my wife, if you met her, she would probably never bring this up. And to be honest, I don't think she spends a whole lot of time thinking about it. And that's just a personality type. And me, on the other hand, I was thinking about it all the time. And I was pretty much telling everybody I met about it. And that was probably not a good thing for my reputation or anything else, but I just couldn't keep it to myself. I felt it was important, and it was sort of consuming of me in a sense that it was an experience that I couldn't explain, and that I guess bothered me, and I wanted an explanation. And so I spent a lot of my free time trying to find that. And over time, the way I looked at it was a couple things. One is I would assume that MUFON is actually a CIA front. It would be the perfect thing for them to run because they'd get the reports from all over the world, and they'd know exactly where things were seen and who saw them, and then they'd be able to tell them what they wanted them to know. I could be wrong, but that was one of my deductions.
Sounds like very plausible.
Yeah, it makes sense. If I was running the CIA, that's what I'd do. And the anti-gravity propulsion thing I started thinking about, and that is possible. It actually fits in with what Bob Lazar described as what you would see from underneath an anti-gravity reactor, was that it would ionize the air. And that is what the MUFON researcher told me. But then I started, the problem, I guess, or one of the problems I had with that is, well, then if this is a super top secret technology that, they shoot people over, then why are they flying it around, at night where everybody can see it? And, it didn't totally make sense to me, the way that I started finding what looked like the same thing all over the world. And at nighttime, it's pretty obvious. I mean, it's a ball of glowing light. Are you there?
Yeah. Well, you know what Bob Lazar says? He says if it looks like it, it has rivets and it was made by Lockheed Martin, it's ours. And if it looks, he describes them as smooth and almost like they're molding injected, then it's probably ETs. And John Lear, he talked about how NASA was founded by Nazi scientists that came here during Operation Paperclip. It was first called NACA, NACA, I believe, and then they changed the name.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. And John Lear, I've watched interviews with him, and that's this topic goes out, and then in fact I wrote down some of the ideas I just thought of, that they're ideas of like a breakaway civilization, and there's ideas of people that take DMT. Have you heard about that at all?
Yes, a little bit, especially more recently. That's becoming more of a topic.
Yeah, and some of those people claim to encounter aliens basically within the out-of-body experience that they have under the influence of DMT, and that's interesting. And then there's the idea. Sorry, go ahead.
Graham Hancock, the researcher, author.
Mm-hmm.
He's like a scientist, I think. He talks about the reason why he quit smoking marijuana is because he tried that ayahuasca, that South American ayahuasca drink, and apparently everyone that tries that, the first thing they encounter is some sort of, everyone describes the same thing. It's like a green female alien.
Right. Yeah, I've heard stories like sometimes I guess ayahuasca is used in groups of people, and these are like you hear videos where they say things, but I've heard allegations that those multiple different people experience the same hallucination, if you will, which like a green alien walking out of the jungle, which would then imply that wasn't a hallucination. And
kind of funny, right? I don't think I don't personally don't think I'm going to be trying that ayahuasca drink.
Well, it sounds kind of intense.
Yeah, quick question. after this experience in 2014, is that when you really became interested in this stuff, or were you already interested in it prior to that, all the way back to when you were a child and you had the experience, or when would you say you really became as interested in it as you are now?
That's a good question. No, that was when I really became interested in it, and maybe through that experience, I remembered the experience of a child. The experience I had as a child was not a life-changing experience. I didn't think about that most of the time, and most of my life I have not really been particularly interested in aliens. Although I've been interested in space. I was in an astronomy club. I've had telescopes, but it was never like I thought there was like aliens coming here and working with the government type of thing. That all started after I saw this, the thing that I described here in Colorado. So that was for me sort of a life-changing experience, even though nothing that I'm aware of directly happened to me. Through that experience, it's sort of changed the way I've seen the world.
What's your gut tell you on that? Like, what does your instinct tell you about that experience? In your opinion, was it like some sort of energy or entity, or was it like a cloaked ship, maybe?
Well, that's a good question. Also, I think at the time that was sort of, yeah,
wormhole.
My impression was that it was something not physical like us, but that it was like alien. And yeah, and it occurred to me that yeah, it could have been like the Starship Enterprise in a different dimension, and I was seeing its warp drive, like
Yeah, well, they talk
coming
about
through.
these wormholes and stuff. Some of the technology supposedly goes through like almost like a wormhole, and to get from point A and instantly to point B.
Interesting, yeah, yeah. So it was that kind of thing, and that was more what I felt that it probably was. That was my instinctual reaction to seeing it, was that I was seeing some type of alien presence, if you will, and then it was after that that you'd find things that you'd read of that sort of fit. Like even some of the descriptions of jinn or genie tend to be of a heatless flame, or so I would catch on to people describing things that look like a flame, and some of those can be found in religion even, and where there's accounts of
Oh yeah,
people
Moses spoke
encountering.
when Moses goes on the mountain in the Bible in the Old Testament and talks to God in almost is described as what you would think of as a ship, and then God speaks to him through like a fiery bush, and then Moses's his face is suddenly like light, kind of like changed, and it looks enlightened or something. Kind of an interesting story. There's a lot of I'm going to be getting into that more in the future. There's a lot of stuff in the Bible that points to UFOs and stuff. For example, when the Israelites are traveling through the desert at night, there's like a fire that follows them, and there's episodes in the Bible where this thing shoots their enemies, and it describes it as shooting them with like fire or lightning. But obviously, this was some sort of a ship or technology, and
Right.
then because it was God following them, and then I guess he would sleep in the traveling tabernacle. But then during the day, this thing appeared as like a pillar, they say.
Interesting. It's fascinating. That's kind of what I was saying earlier, or part of what I was touching on, is you can see, I guess I feel from a point of view of being a modern human and looking at religious accounts, you could see where it would be pretty easy to replace a UFO or alien experience with religion and God. It's just you kind of start off with these strange experiences, and then somebody writes in what the rest of the story is, which is that there was a God and it has this intent. But that's very much like the UFO cults, if you will, that you'll get these different versions of what these things are and who they are, what they want. And so it seems to have a common thread to me of humans encountering something that they don't understand, and then they're creating a story behind it. And some of them maybe literally have the right story, and some of them I assume don't, because there's certainly a lot of different ones out there. But that sounds like what you're saying with religion, and that is a watching what was the movie called? It was a pretty new movie about the pharaoh in Egypt, and the son is like a Jewish slave that they didn't realize was Jewish, with Christian Bale in it. It's a good movie, but it shows the ocean literally being parted so they could walk across the Red Sea, and it occurred to me from my point of view of an alien could probably do that, and they would probably have the technology to part the ocean and let you walk across. And like you were saying, they would have I think in that movie, it's where they have I think it's mostly the Jewish slaves that are writing I don't remember what it was, an X on their door with lamb blood, and the people that didn't do that, their babies died in the night.
Oh yeah, because of the
Potentially from a alien technology point of view, there would be a logical explanation for that. But if you were a primitive human experiencing it, you wouldn't understand any of that. And if you or I could travel back in time 1,000 years and we tried to describe this conversation we're having right now, I'm not sure what you're using, they would think that we were crazy. And if you could show them the technology, they would probably think it came from God. And that, I think, is a human reaction to things that you don't understand.
Oh, definitely. And one of my main areas of study is spiritual science, and the historical figure Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, I hope I pronounced that correct. He is reported to have performed a lot of miracles, much greater than that even Jesus is supposedly reported as performing in the Bible, which is interesting. So again, I get back to some of these things are I think of a spiritual nature, and as long as people try to see it through materialistic eyes, some of this stuff is going to remain a mystery.
Well, yeah, that's a valid point of view, and that may well be. And so, yeah, for me, it's opened me up to considering spirituality, and which is not something I grew up doing really, and considering that I would now have to say I think people do have a soul. I mean, for lack of a better word, it's not something that I can scientifically define, but I think that there is. I sort of have the sense that we're in a flesh and blood body, but that's not us, and that what it is that's you is something that isn't exactly physical, and
it's a vehicle, the body.
Yeah, exactly.
Just like we get in our car and drive to the store or go to work, this physical body is just a vehicle for our true self.
Yes, exactly, and that gets into why you judge. People are very materialistic, and including myself. I mean, you can't help but be somewhat, or I can't, but feeling that I have flaws, and it's easy to judge someone by their appearance, which has nothing to do with the soul inside, like you were saying. I mean, the body is a vehicle. It's not the person. The person is something you can't see, and that's interesting. And in some ways, that by itself, I think, is somewhat enriching and it can help you grow as a person to realize that. I think some of the most beautiful people I've seen have been some of the most physically compromised, and not necessarily in appearance, but literally like some of the, some type of disorder where their growth is affected and their appearance is affected. But then when you listen to what they say and you start to see the person inside, the response is, that's the most beautiful person I've ever seen. And those kinds of things you start to kind of encounter, I think, what you're talking about, which is that the person is not the flesh and blood. And it's similar to what people say, when somebody dies and you go to a funeral and you're looking at their physical body, but there's the sense that that's not them. They're not there. That's just a body, and it becomes almost kind of alien to you at that point. And you have the sense that isn't the person that you loved, and that it's their body, and it's what's familiar to you. It's the physical appearance, but that's not them.
It's an empty shell at that point, right?
Correct.
They say that after 3 days passes, the our spiritual body is fully disconnected from the physical body. It remains connected through what they describe as a silver cord, which is similar, interestingly similar to the umbilical cord that connects the baby to the mother. And so it takes 3 days for that to be fully disconnected, and then it's just an empty shell.
Interesting. But yeah, that's essentially what I'm saying. And yeah, no, it is. It's interesting, and I'm still fascinated by it. And there are a lot of different sort of theories. Some of them being like, computer simulation and all of those, aliens that are concerned about us, and religious aliens and warring aliens and soul seeding programs. There are all these different takes on this idea, but they do tend to incorporate the idea that what you physically experience isn't really the real you. That like you said, that the body that you're in isn't you. And that potentially then it can imply that even all the physical other things in this world aren't exactly real. And that's sort of a different topic that maybe we get into another time. But even on the subatomic level, when you break down atoms and subatomic particles, you start to see that there's really nothing there. But as you go smaller and smaller and smaller, you kind of run out of physical things, and it ends up being an energy that isn't solid, and that starts to have the quality of a hologram or
Similar. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Definitely similar to the hologram matrix theory. Although I don't personally ascribe to the hologram matrix theory as far as the world we live in. And for example, now that Stephen Hawking has passed away, I would say the leading scientist is probably Michio Kaku, the Japanese scientist, and he maintains that it's not possible just because there's no computer that humanity possesses at this point in time that's advanced enough to maintain this world over an long extended period of time without like a malfunction or a glitch or some sort of error or something like that.
Yeah. Well, that's, I mean, that I don't know him personally, and I'm not, one of the, I feel from my arrogant, I guess, point of view is that a common flaw with human attitudes is comparing our technology. I think you have to sort of assume that anything you can think of is possible, and it's probably out there, and that there would be computer programs that are beyond your understanding and also beyond your language. In other words, there would be things you wouldn't even have words for. I would just sort of, the way I look at it is I would assume that it's out there. I would assume that it is possible. It doesn't mean it's true, but that there could be programs that are so incredibly advanced that they not only could simulate this reality, but they could at the same time simulate a billion different parallel realities with just one tiny thing different in them, all at the same time. And that is possible. And that it even occurred to me with the idea of source energy, with the idea that there's this consciousness that came first, and from that everything else arose. And I usually get my hand kind of slapped down regardless of who it is I talk to about this. But and I don't mean that in a negative way, just that people disagree with my idea. But my idea is that sort of sounds like an AI,
Yeah, I'm open to any views or opinions, and so this is a friendly chat and friendly channel, always open to other people's opinions and information. We love different views and information. It's the only way we can learn and find out the truth. But I did want to just to be clear on one point real quick before I forget.
Sure.
The gentleman you spoke to from MUFON, did you actually share these photos that you're sharing with us? Did you share them with him?
Well, it's a good question. I did post, I think I just posted the one that has the round shape that doesn't have the snake shape.
Okay.
And no, he didn't. I don't think he asked for the photos. Yeah, although he did have this boilerplate interview or questions for me, I'd have to say it sort of had the air of he wasn't really that interested. And
Are they
So no,
exclusive now, being as far as being released publicly? Would you say it's just now being released, or do you think that they are already online? Have you shared them at all in any other capacity?
I've shared them like with people that I know, like on Discord, but no, I don't think they're online, and you're welcome to. And I'm the one that took the photo, so there's nobody that has exclusive rights to them by any means. And it's fine with me if if you use them.
Share them in the
And
video
yeah,
for the
absolutely.
interview.
I've always tried to kind of share this experience with people, and I'm not doing it to try to get attention or to or to make money. I just think it's an important topic, and that people that have had experiences should share what it is they experienced. And like you said, the important thing is to entertain different ideas and collectively brainstorm, if you will. And of course, I say that within sort of my self-acknowledged perception of that. I would assume that there are actually very well put together entities, probably military / intelligence, that do look at these topics, and they do have a lot of the answers that we're debating, and that they have top-notch scientists that are researching them. In fact, I remember looking at some of the older job postings from Bigelow Aerospace, and who it was they were hiring and what the job qualifications were, and they had to pass top secret security clearance, and it was, so I sort of had the perception that there's a iron curtain, and that all of the public's on one side, including you and me. I'm assuming you. I don't, that it certainly includes me. That I don't have any top secret knowledge. Nobody's told me anything, that's come out of a military lab or something, or broken a security clearance agreement. These are just things that I've thought up and read, and you maybe read someone's idea and then you expand on it yourself. But I have the perception that there are answers to a lot of these things, and for some reason they're kept secret, and that they're kept secret with quite a bit of power and money. I would say that a lot of things on the internet are intentional distractions, and sort of the policy of flooding the public space with all kinds of different theories and information, and in so doing, you're kind of hiding the needle in the haystack. It makes it harder to tell what the truth maybe is, because there's just so many different ideas and accounts out there, and that's a pretty effective tool for secrecy. And the other thing, to be quite frank, that I've encountered, and I didn't touch on this, but when I told my own family members about my experience, and it could be that it was ball lightning or something completely explainable, but that isn't how I felt. And to me, I even turned to family members who right away, in fact, that was one of the interesting things, is I was met with just complete disbelief by virtually everyone. And that in and of itself was shocking to me. I even talked to retired NASA astronauts. Nobody asked to see the pictures. Nobody was interested. It was almost like there was mind control, and that people weren't allowed to be interested. It was just a complete brick wall, and that in and of itself was almost as much of an experience as seeing the UFO, because that's not what I thought would happen. I thought there would be at least some people that would be like, oh my God, really? What happened? And yeah, tell me about it, and let me see the picture. And instead, what I found was virtually none of that. Nobody's interested, nobody cares, nobody believes you. And so from that, I had the experience of, my mom, for instance, would say, Doug, the government can't keep secrets. And I would say they don't have to, because even if you could walk into Area 51 and take a video recorder and go around and film a bunch of aliens in pods, I can pretty much guarantee you that nobody would believe you. Your video would be called a fake, and it would just be one of millions of videos that are out there on YouTube that wouldn't change anything. And so in that world, they don't really have to keep secrets, because even if what you're saying is true, there's sort of the effect of people don't believe you. And it seems like an authority figure, which oftentimes is a news anchor, you know, a $3,000 suit that never leaves the studio. Until that person tells people something's true with absolutely no evidence or any qualification to make it believable, there's just something about the authority of that that makes people believe. And before that person says that, it doesn't matter how educated you are or what position you hold. If it's just you telling people, then people see you as a nut and as questionable. And so that itself was kind of a interesting experience for me.
Well, I do believe you. I'm a pretty good judge of character. I definitely appreciated having you on the show and interviewing you. I think that the audience will appreciate it as well. I know there's a lot of stuff out there and people who have interesting experiences and stories, and there's just not enough people that can cover everything. So I'm looking forward to covering more of this stuff similar to this in the future, as well as some other topics. And we're going on about, I think, 90 minutes now or so. Okay. And so before we wrap it up, is there anything else you wanted to add or touch on?
No, I mean, I've enjoyed it, and I appreciate you doing the interview. It's fun to do. I like
you can look at your notes
it.
if you want. I've already gone through all mine, and you've answered everything I had written down.
Yeah, and I have. I think I went through all of mine, and yeah, it's been fun. I'm happy to talk to you again. Like I said, you're welcome to share this, and yeah, it's all just really fascinating stuff to me.
Well,
So,
Doug, thank you for being on the show. And I actually I'm hopeful to maybe have you on again in the future.
Yeah, I'd love that. I'd be happy to. So, yeah, cool.
All right, well, thank you. And
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to start working on the video and get it put together, and hopefully within the next 24 hours or so it'll be released.
All right, cool. Well, yeah, I'd like to see it and share it with people.
And I'll send you a like a permanent if you wanted to be a member of the on the Discord here.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, that'd be great. I'd like that.
All right, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you. Thank you.
All right, take care.
You too.